All right. Good evening, everybody. It is November 7th at 6 o'clock p.m. You're here with me, Kareem Scales, Executive Director for the Greater Grand Rapids NAACP. And we all know what time it is. It's time that we get our community ready for tomorrow. This is a very important election. A lot is at stake. We're going to be having just a candid conversation. We want everyone to be able to be a part of this. So if you got any questions or thoughts or anything in the comments, please feel free to do so. Excited to have President Clee Jackson of our local branch. He's going to be joining the discussion, as well as our youth council president, Javon Fields, joining, and some of our other youth council members, really to unpack what's at stake tomorrow for the election, right? We know that reproduction rights are on the ballot. We know that there's some voter suppression efforts on the ballot. So some believe that this is most important election of our lifetime. So we got to make sure that we turn out. And this live stream is meant to just create space for us to have conversation with community, talk about what's at stake, and answer any last remaining questions before the polls open tomorrow at 7 a.m. I'm going to go ahead and add President Jackson to the stream now. Mr. Jackson.
What's happening, brother Kareem?
I'm doing well, sir. How about yourself, man?
I am doing well. We are in the last push to make sure folks get out. So I'm doing great.
That's for sure. Yeah, I was just kind of giving the precursor, kind of letting everybody know what the goal is of this live stream. I'm going to add President Fields now as well. President Fields, how you doing, sir?
I'm all right. How you doing?
Good, brother. We are live right now with President Jackson and myself. I was just kind of giving the intro to the audience about, what we're doing, why this is important, what's at stake, and why is it important that we show up to the polls tomorrow and exercise our democratic right.
Right.
So, yeah, we hear y'all. We've been hitting it hard in the community for over the last week. We were just out today. We're doing various pop-ups at different locations. Yesterday, we were at Hall Street Party Store, really just talking with the people, right? Being present, checking voter registration statuses, assisting with that, helping people find their polling site, helping people view a sample ballot. But a lot of it is just really being present in the community, right? Having those real conversations with our people, and the good and bad, right? Some people feel they know. We've heard several times over the last week, why should I even vote? You know what I mean? So lots of conversations happen, and ultimately we know why it's important, and that's why we're here now. So, fellas, just jump in, man. What's at stake tomorrow?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and start with this right here. So a lot of people don't understand that the general election is probably the most important election that you'll be involved in, because the general election, the people on the ballot, their proposals directly impact you, like effective immediately, right? Typically, the presidential election gets all the popularity, right? There's a lot of personality behind it, but the general election, those people make decisions about you, right? Mm-hmm. Essentially, the state has its own constitution, right? And so your governor, lieutenant governor, is essentially your president and vice president of the state. And so they can make an impact on you, right? They care about what you care about. But if we don't hold them accountable and we don't voice our concerns, then a lot of the changes we want to see won't happen, right?
Well said. I never heard it broken down that way, but you're right. I guess lieutenant governor and governor, they are our local president and vice president, right? Mm-hmm. But I like how you ended it in the spirit of accountability. President Jackson, you got some thoughts? You're on mute, brother.
There we go. Okay. I just want to say thanks, President Fields, for joining us this evening. And I'm just so excited about how our young folks have been out here actually on the ground, really pushing this get out the vote campaign, because it's critical. You talk about what's at stake. It's a whole lot at stake. You talking about healthcare, you talking about criminal justice reform, you're talking about education, you're talking about youth engagement and empowerment, you're talking about just fair representation, right? And if it really wasn't that important, it didn't matter, all of the attacks, not only here in Michigan, where we've seen over the past year and a half, where there have been 39 bills in the state legislature to try to restrict our access to the ballot box, right? So why would you do that if it's not important? And not only is it important here in Michigan, it's important across the state. Well, not the state, but the country. We see what's going on with Reverend Warnock and Val, our brothers and sisters in Georgia and in Texas and Florida. And people are trying to really intentionally, almost like surgical precision, to restrict the right for, and I'm just going to be honest, for Black folk and other people of color to have access, unfettered access to the ballot box. So that's why it's important. The other thing I would say is this: it's not about, we're nonpartisan. So this is not about partisanship. It's about policy. It's about rocking with those individuals who make sure that their door is wide open, and that there are folks like us and other citizens across the state of Michigan, right here locally and across this country, that have access to them, and to be able to discuss these serious issues, and not only discuss them, but to really take them seriously. Because, you know, at the end of the day as well, we need to make sure, and we need to uplift, and I'll say this to both parties, whether it's Democratic or Republican, there has to be an agenda that uplifts Black community, indigenous folks, other people of color. And so that's what you vote on. You vote right now. This election is about voting for righteousness. It's not about voting for party. So you can assume and you can take away in terms of what I just said. It's about righteousness. So vote your conscience. That's really what it's about. The other thing, we have a clear opportunity in the state of Michigan to make history by electing the first Black Supreme female jurist for the Michigan Supreme Court, Kyra Harris Bolden. And so that's huge. So we can right here in the state of Michigan elect the first Black female jurist to the Michigan Supreme Court. So it's a lot at stake. So I just hope that everybody will come out and exercise their democratic right to vote. And not sit this one out, because this is critically important. Just like President Fields said, we have to understand that local elections impact our everyday quality of life living standards. Local elections impact our quality of life everyday living standards. So it is crucial. It's crucial that that folks get out and exercise this democratic right to vote. So we're going to rock this vote tomorrow. We're going to show up and we're going to vote. And not only, as I've said before, the real work actually happens after November the 8th. So that's when the real work takes place. And what I mean by that is that we have to make sure that we are getting the fair share of resources deployed and executed in an intentional manner to uplift our community and other communities that have been underserved and underrepresented in this democratic process. So we have to start challenging everyone. We can't just sit back and look at, okay, what is the Republican Party doing? What is the Democratic Party doing? No, everybody has to be held accountable. And we need to make sure that there are resources being deployed to underserved communities.
I want to add Mr. Glover to the conversation, Cleve, but I want to see if we can dive a little deeper into that as well. When we talk about accountability, I know we've all seen a lot of the talk going on in the media and across various platforms that, some feel like uh, specifically, I'm just going to call it out that the Democratic Party has taken advantage of the black vote for far too long. That's not my personal opinion. That's just what I'm sure we've all seen that that's a narrative that's been put out there. What do you all say to people who bring up that um, as an issue, and how do we hold them accountable? If you all do agree.
Yeah, I would add first that we have to take responsibility and dive deeper into what are the issues and problems that we care about, and then figure out who and what can essentially tackle those problems, right? And so when we find somebody who can uh, provide solution to those problems, again, like I said before, are they being held accountable? And like President Jackson said, the real work starts after the election, because we need to continuously let our elected officials know that these are our concerns. These are the issues going on in the Black and brown community. And so we want you to fulfill your promise to us. You got our vote, so fulfill your promise and do what needs to be done. And too many times we tend to go to elections, we vote, and then we're done, right? We did our civic duty, we're done. But we have to continuously exercise our democratic power by always holding our elected officials accountable and diving deep. What are your issues? And then with these officials, these candidates who are running, do they actually care? Are these officials who are drafting policies, who are trying to advocate for you, or are they saying a bunch of sweet nothings?
Well said, President Fields. We just brought on Mr. Glover. Mr. Glover, welcome to the conversation. You came in right as I posed the question to President Jackson and President Fields around some of the narrative that's out in the public now, that some feel that specifically the Democratic Party has taken advantage of the black vote for far too long. In the spirit of accountability, how do we, make sure that these elected officials are held accountable for the promises they make during campaign season? How do we ensure that they actually turn that into real action once they get in those seats? I don't know if President Jackson or Mr. Glover, either of you wanted to chime in on that.
Yeah, I know Brother Percy it looks like he's probably trying to get his camera and his mic together. But again, as I said, the real work starts after November 8th. And what I mean by that is that, for example, the NAACP, the Urban League, any other organization who's out here and on the ground and who care about these kitchen table issues, as we would say in the political world, we all have to show up. So, and what I mean by showing up is that we look at the school board elections. We have never had, this has been a record number of school board folks running for school boards. Not only here, I think we have like 15 or so, and just for the Grand Rapids Public School Board in Forest Hills. We never had that in my recollection, those many people running. And so, but whomever is elected in, the next step is we have to show up to these school board meetings. We have to be there and understand what's on the agenda, what's being discussed. So we are being a little more proactive instead of reactive, and we can address these issues. Same thing as when you look at city commission meetings and county commission meetings, we got to show up and be in the room to understand what's on these consent agendas, what's on the agenda, how are these things impacting us that have been disproportionately impacting in a negative way the decisions that are being made. And so we got to show up. We have to, again, at the state level, if there are certain issues and we need to provide expert testimony or just testimony from community members, how things are impacting them directly on the local level and on the ground, we got to show up, and we got to be in a room. And I'll say this: if they're locking the door behind us and trying to intentionally keep us out of the room, then we need to kick the damn door down. That's what we need to do. That's what I'm talking about, showing up. We got to be a little more radical in our actions. And then the other thing is too, and I'm just going to put it out here, we have to make sure that we are being proactive in finding candidates and individuals in community who actually want to run for these seats, who actually have real lived experiences, with respect to all of these seats. And so I think that's just critically important. So again, November the 8th, tomorrow, is critical, is crucial. And this is going to be one of the most telling elections, I think, in our history, in terms of, and I'm not just talking about Michigan, I'm talking about across this country, what's happening. So it'll really be interesting to see, to see what will take place, and what's at stake.
I got another question for you fellas. I'm going to bring on another one of our youth council members, Onesimus Pee-wee, just to quickly join the conversation. I know he's multitasking, but Ness, good to see you on, brother. We right now, the conversation is, we were just shifting from a question I posed to the group about some feel that the black vote has been taken advantage of. How do we, better foster that sense of accountability? But you can speak to that or anything you want to speak to, brother. It's an open field, man. What's your thoughts and feelings right now?
So first and foremost, how y'all doing? Good evening. My name is Onesimus Pee-wee. I'm a member of the Youth Council led by Javon L. Fields. And so this election, I really just want to stress that, these are the election that really, matters. A lot of people just kind of toss it to the side when it comes to midterms. It's not like the presidential. It's not this big old, grand thing. But these are the elections that really affect our day-to-day lives. Regardless of whatever you think. But when it comes to the black vote, that is interesting. A lot of these candidates do kind of just, try to sell false dreams when it comes to us. We talked about this. We talked about this a lot. And yeah, I mean, that can be open for discussion. I really don't. There's been conversations about, should we wait until a candidate really shows up and proves that they're for us? What is the agenda that we want to carry? And so that is open for discussion for me. I don't have an answer, me personally, but let me know what you guys think.
Yeah, I think it's important that we need to, as the black community, come together, unify, and be diligent in our work into understanding what's on the ballot and what's at stake, right? And like I said before, not accepting things face value, but digging deeper. And so a candidate can tell you anything they want to tell you to get them votes, right? But how are we going to ensure that we get what we want, right? And again, we cannot allow ourselves to just go out there and vote and then be done. Just wipe our hands clean, like, hey, we went out there. And the thing about it too is that don't go out there and vote just because NAACP told you to do it, right? Don't let that be your sole reason. Do it because you want to see effective change in the community, and you believe that these candidates and these proposals directly reflect your concerns and your issues, and they'll make a change for your community, right? There is a lot at stake right now. And if we want to see effective change, we must hold our candidates accountable. But additionally, how are we grooming candidates from our own community, right? So how are we grooming, the youth and young adults to essentially transition into candidates? They share an experience from the Black community. We should be grooming, young people to run for those seats, right? People who look like us and represent us, right? And all people to be in these seats. Too many times we rely on people who don't know what our experience like to represent us effectively, right? And oftentimes we put too much pressure on our candidates to essentially cover everything that we care about, right? They don't know until we tell them.
Well said, President Fields. I want to go to a comment really quick from Ms. Carrie Jackson, who is one of our executive committee members. How you doing, Ms. Jackson? She said, look at the candidate's voting record, right? For those who have served in a role, we can go and check out what is their voting record. Does their beliefs align with your beliefs and values? So that's a good way to determine who deserves your vote, right?
Yeah. Additionally, you can look at the ballot right now and see what's upcoming for tomorrow. And education is very important. There's a lot of people, especially young people, who don't understand the political process, election process, right? And how extensive the ballot is. I remember in 2020 when we encouraged a lot of young people who are first-time voters to go out there and vote for the presidential election. A lot of them thought that it was just you're voting for the president. No, it's a lot on the ballot. And for your general election, there are things on the ballot such as proposals, and one of them being Prop 3, which is, advocating for the inclusion of women's reproductive rights on our Constitution. Now, our state constitution can easily be amended, right? Versus our federal constitution, that political process to get anything amended in the Constitution federally is very difficult, but your state constitution is directly representative of the people. You vote on what's amended on your state constitution. Again, your governor, lieutenant governor, is your president and vice president, secretary of state, attorney general, and actually the board of education. These are all things on the ballot, including in this election, depending on where you live, your jurisdiction, your precinct, right? You can have different legislators, like the state senator, right, for your district, who directly represent you. So it's important to look up who's going to represent your community.
No, you're right too, and I think you kind of hinted to something else, and that's the redistricting, right? We've seen. I think this is going to be our first official midterm, since the redistricting. So we've seen a lot of the districts change and representation. I think we've lost a significant amount of Black representation in the state as well, both the east side and the west side of the state. So a lot of important things. I want to go over a couple highlights, guys, and then you feel free to jump in. Couple of things that I think are worth noting, that are some wins that we've seen in the most recent years. One of them is police reform, right? We're still fighting for the George Floyd Act, but we were successful in getting the police to reform an executive order that restricted the use of no-knock warrants and chokeholds by federal officers. So that was a win. We also, during the pandemic, got $46 million in housing assistance that was made available. And we need to ensure that those programs are able to continue with or without a pandemic. You also got the child tax credit. Because of our votes, The child tax credit was expanded, excuse me, which reduced Black poverty by 20%. That's $3.7 million for Black and brown children. The Black turnout in the 2020 election, we all know what happened there. Record turnouts in the Black community. And then lastly, student debt relief. This student debt relief is going to narrow the racial wealth gap with up to 43 million borrowers who could benefit. And I'm one of those borrowers myself. So for some who feel like there haven't been any recent wins, there are some wins that we can celebrate. But those of us who know, we still know that there's a long way to go. And that's why it's important that we show up to the polls tomorrow.
Yeah, another thing I'll add to that too is that we have to celebrate the wins, right? We know this stuff has been, in terms of, in terms of the, our community and our community not really getting the fair share. This stuff has been around for a very long time, and so we have to celebrate those wins. Yes, I know there were a lot of folks that, there were some individuals that, said that, hey, you know what, $10,000 in student, 10,000 up to 20,000 in student debt cancellation is not that significant, or and we understand, just like the NAACP, and I fully agree with our stance on it as an association, that there could be more, but we're also glad that we have something. I'll take 10,000. I wish that would have been around when I had my debt, before I had to pay my debt off and my parents had to pay my debt. So I would take $20,000 and keep it moving and continue the fight to get more. And so those things that when we see wins, we got to take them and celebrate. And that's again why we have to make sure that we have the right people in office. And as the comment said, I think Ms. Jackson put it perfectly. Do they align with your beliefs and values? And so that's what it's about. And so, but again, the real work starts after the 8th, because it seems like to me, and I'll just talk about the Michigan State ballot in terms of the legislature, everybody's being challenged. I mean, literally all of the Dems and everybody, they're being challenged. When you look at, even down to our city commission, the Grand Rapids City Commission, there are challengers. There's challengers. There's a challenger for the 3rd ward seat. There's a challenger for the 2nd ward seat. And so again, I would say check the records of all of these individuals and see if they align with your beliefs, and if we can actually, if these individuals who are eventually elected into office, if their strategies will be intentional to uplift communities that have been disproportionately impacted in a very negative way. And I would also say, and I think we can do it, if we have any candidates who are listening to this, if they want to come on and make comment, this is a great opportunity for them to do that too, on both sides of the aisle. So we welcome that as well. Because we ain't gonna be on here all night. We gonna we out here, we're gonna be in these streets until the polls close, and making sure that we encourage folks to get out and to show up tomorrow to their polls.
I got you, President Jackson. Yeah, no, I think we're gonna wrap up in a minute. Just go to a couple more comments. Leonard Eisen, he commented, me too, just kind of echoing some of the comments that we shared, as well as Nicole Thompson. She said, challenged and a lot of Trump-supported candidates. I think we've seen a record turnout of candidates that have been endorsed by our past president, Donald Trump. So a lot at stake, you all. I want to go to one more question to the fellas. So National NAACP, and you all know, has been on the ground across the country doing some great work. This year's GOTV, or Get Out to Vote, theme is Together, Power, Vote. And through their efforts, they've determined the top 5 issues that voters have told them about, that as to why they're going to the polls. I want to go over the 5, and then I want to hear from each of you brothers. Which of these 5 do you think is most important in today, as it relates to tomorrow's election? The first one is inflation, right? We all know about inflation, how living expenses continue to rise, everything from food to gas to mortgage rates. They said that Black women have actually been the most impacted financially by the pandemic. So we need elected officials who are going to work to make the necessities more affordable. So we got inflation as one, criminal justice reform and police brutality. We all know that that's a high ranking topic, with all the different issues in our community, as it relates to George Floyd, et cetera. Patrick Leoya, right here in our very own city, Grand Rapids. We need to hold those elected officials, law enforcement, and judges accountable. Those judges are elected seats as well. Affordable housing is another top issue that we're hearing about. Gun violence obviously has increased across the country. So that's another key issue. And lastly, just racism and discrimination as a whole. So those are our top 5 issues that the National NAACP identified as to why people are going to the polls. Again, that's inflation, criminal justice reform, affordable housing, gun violence, and just the overall conversation about racism and discrimination. I want to go to each of you fellas on the stream, and we'll bring Mr. Glover on now as well. How you doing, Mr. Glover? Just talking about the top 5 issues that that are at stake during this election. But go ahead and jump in the conversation, sir.
Good evening, and my apologies. I was busy at the jail actually collecting absentee ballots and trying to get them back over to the clerk. So my apologies. Really, really busy day. Busy day tomorrow also.
No apology needed, man. That's what the work is about, brother.
Definitely. And thank you, Cleve, for inviting me to this. If I had to say anything, in my mind, there's no way that you can separate all 5 issues. I mean, if you look at it, the core struggle in the Black and brown communities all stem from an economic piece or perspective. Mm-hmm. You know, if you look at the high school dropout, if you look at people in jail and prison, if you look at healthcare, you look at affordable housing, the core issue for Black people, we're poor. We're culturally, traditionally, generationally poor. Before COVID-19, 60% of Black families lived in poverty. That is the core piece to everything. And when you look at the criminal justice system, a great deal of people are in jail because of just a handful of reasons. You have a juvenile population that lack the maturity, and because their immaturity landed them into a difficult space. You have a large population of people who struggle with mental health issues. If they had the fiscal resources that could find the support necessary, they probably wouldn't have been in jail. You have a great deal of people in jail and in prison because they poor and did things out of desperation to take care of themselves. So everything has an economic perspective that drives all of these things. So in my mind, there's no way to separate them without looking at the fiscal aspect first and how the fiscal aspect, again, drives every piece of every struggle that we deal with as a people.
Brother Percy, I want to ask you if you can let the people know where you are, what city, and then also the organizations that you're affiliated with, because you're doing a lot of heavy lifting out there, brother.
Thank you. So I am a Flintstone, born and raised Flint, Michigan. Like Clee and the rest of us wear a lot of different hats involved in a lot of different ways. A lot of irony to where I am professionally. I am a contractor for the National Sheriff's Association. I am also co-director of community engagement for the Genesee County Sheriff's Office. which is honestly, and I have to say it in all humility, a lifetime movie in itself for a person who has spent 12 years in prison, working with 2 sheriff's office as a paid employee and a paid contracted employee. Again, it's a lifetime movie. It's a blessing that I would have never expected. Also being a person who was a violent offender that was shot at and retaliated, men of color don't get these chances. You know, so I have to be very, very, very thankful to the National Sheriff's Office, as well as Sheriff Christopher R. Swanson, who both recognized the benefit of having somebody, as Clee said, with those lived experiences. I've transitioned from jail and prison successfully, so I can play a part in how we need to help others transition back to the community from jail now. People don't understand that most of the people in the jail are going back to the community immediately. It's a smaller percentage that goes to prison, even more smaller percentage that goes to prison for a very long time. And with that, we need to be giving people the tools, the resources, the education, and everything, because they'll be our neighbors sooner than later. And we want to have them involved, engaged responsibly in our community. We don't want to see them with them same struggles that led them to jail, that led them to prison. We want to help them. And one thing that people don't understand, we're not born criminals. No one is 100% perfect 100% of the time. No one is 100% evil 100% of the time. We're all human. We have our human moments. And most people in jail has lived, experienced high levels of trauma. And because there wasn't a process of healing for that trauma, they ended up in jail. I tell people all the time, people always banish sex offenders. And not to justify anybody who did anything to violate a child, a man or woman sexually, but 99% of sex offenders were victims first. And if we don't look at the aspect of how to heal people instead of banishing them, we just add to the problem. But I use that specific group of offenders as an example that most people in jail and prison, 99% of them were the victims first. That's how they ended up in jail and prison. And we need to find a way and an avenue and processes for people to heal. For the Black community is heightened and multiplied 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100. Because not only have we experienced trauma, we've experienced trauma from an impoverished place, from a place of being poor, from a place of not having resources. And it's generational, it's traditional, it's a culture, it's socioeconomic, it's economic. Some of it is still driven and moved by racial and racist forces. And so when we pull all these layers back and look at what needs to happen and how we need to change things, it's so much deeper. One of the things I'm also heavily involved in is jail voting. If you have not been sentenced and you're residing in a Michigan jail, you can vote absentee ballot. This November 8th election tomorrow will be the 10th straight election that we supported jail voting in the Genesee County Jail. And over the last year, working with Voting Access for All Coalition, working with Nation Outside, working with Black Voters Matter, working with When We All Vote, et cetera, all these great groups that are involved in the work. We're now looking at how we can build things out across the state of Michigan and also nationally. Because when you talk about a person residing in jail, we're talking about on a daily basis about 12,000 people being disenfranchised as voters in jail. We're talking about millions of people when we look at across the country. Voting is a constitutional right. That right is not removed because you're in jail. People in jail should be afforded that same constitutional right in the same way as people are in the community. Any eligible age voter should have access to a ballot. Nothing less, nothing more. It's the law, it's a constitutional right, and no one can remove that legally.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And that's critically important. And oftentimes we forget about that. And it is, again, making sure everyone has, as I said, unfettered access to the ballot box. And that's what we need to make sure. I want to say I met Percy at a Black Voters Matters convening in Detroit. And when I heard him talk and he did a presentation, I was blown away. And I was like, this brother is the real deal right here. And we need to have him, and we are going to have you come over to the West Side and figure out some things that we need to do here better with respect to that, making sure that all individuals have access to that ballot box. And it is the other thing that you said tonight, and it's interesting because I've been saying this since the pandemic, when people were asking, you know, I had CEOs calling me and all of these other executive level leaders calling me from a variety of companies, for profit, nonprofit, whatever. What can we do, Cleve? What's really happening on the street? And the number one thing that I said to all of them is that you have to first understand that the Black community specifically was in a pandemic way before COVID-19 showed up. We were already in a pandemic. And so we cannot play games and deny the truth. And that's where we are. And so again, that's why it's critically important to exercise your democratic right to vote and to get out. But not only exercise, we got to stop asking the question about, does my vote matter? And we have to start asking the question is, okay, how are we going to move that, kick the ball down the field to make sure that these individuals, I don't care who it is, whether it's on the Democratic side or the GOP, but if you get elected, you are a representative for all the people. And we need to make sure, and we need to keep, literally own them to make sure that they are providing the necessary resources and that they're listening to us to understand what the real needs are in our communities as well. And this is a thing too. Elections, when you are elected, you got to come back up for re-election. So we have to pay attention to that. And oftentimes we should vote people out. And so again, the real work begins, November the 4th, after November the 8th. And so we just got to keep pushing. We got to keep pushing.
And Cleve, if I could chime in just real quickly, one of the things I always tell people, I say, as a voter, you are the employer. As the employer, you should be concerned with HR matters. You should be concerned with the hiring process and who's being hired. Your vote employs somebody. And if that somebody is not, if them or somebody else from their office not returning calls, not answering emails, don't have your best concern at heart, doesn't have the community's best concern at heart, and also, like you said, when we talk about lived experience, most elected officials or people campaigning to become elected officials, they don't understand the human side, and they have not had the lived experience. So also, if they do not have at least staff that understands that human side, if they don't have staff that has those lived experiences, we should also be questioning, why are we voting for this person? Because that leadership is the investment you made. So again, if they're not answering calls, if they don't have your best interest, if they're not listening, if we're not seeing them in the community, if we don't see them talking to the community members, we should be questioning that.
I agree with you 100%, Percy. I think what some would say to that is, too often when we show up to these polls, it's not even about which candidate do you want to support. It's more about which one is the lesser, which one do I know I can't support? You know what I mean? So in that scenario where you have a person who you gave your vote to, and you don't feel like they've done well with your vote, that other candidate may be even worse off. So I think we've gotten caught into that space, but I think that goes back to what President Jackson said earlier about voting these people out. But voting people out only works when we got the right people to run for the positions and take over those seats. Because too often we're like, I may not necessarily agree with this person, but I know I can't vote for that person. And I think candidates have kind of figured that out and have been living in that space for a while. We got to Clee's point, we got to get the right people to run for those seats.
Definitely.
We got another comment from Mr. Leonard Eisen in the chat. He's also executive committee member. He says one of his top issues is the jury pool here in the city, right? Where too often there's a lack of minorities on the jury pool, specifically Black men. We know that's a major issue, not just in Grand Rapids, but across the country. And I'm not quite sure who is the responsible party. Is that a city thing? Is that a statewide thing? Is that a federal thing? But I agree with you, Leonard. That's a major issue. We got to figure out who's the target at tackling that.
Yeah, I agree. That's always been an issue. And I think that's one of the things we need to really take a deeper dive into as we move forward and we get beyond these elections. It's that whole jury pool selection. I know Commissioner Mayhew, who's a former commissioner for Kent County, that was one of his main issues, and has been still to this day in terms of the jury selection pool. So I think after this election, we need to connect with Commissioner Paul Mayhew and see how do we address that issue. The other issue is somebody mentioned earlier about the courts, the judges. I was looking at my ballot, and I don't think any of them are contested. And so to me, that's always been a bane of my existence, because when you look at the Kent County Court building, I think it's 180 Ottawa, they're slaughtering our people down there. They really are, on so many levels. And so that's another issue that we really have to pay attention to, and make sure that there is a process to encourage other folks to run for those judgeships. And so that's another huge issue as well, in my opinion.
For sure. So let's I think it's about 6:50 now, fellas, if we can, unless anyone else has anything else specific you want to touch on.
Let me
close
very quick, Kareem.
Go ahead, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to highlight two main issues I think that was not mentioned that should be a major concern for Black voters as they go into the elections, not only for the general election tomorrow, but also the presidential election, right? There are two major concerns that Black voters must have. The first one is quid pro quo, getting an exchange for your vote. Make sure you get something for something. If these candidates want your vote, make sure you get the outcome you're looking for, right? The second thing is, this is one that most people don't pay attention to, but it's essential. Interest groups. We have to take a look at who are funding these campaigns and what are their agendas. Most of the time with elections, yes, our vote does count as the people, especially in general elections, but interest groups control the direction of the government, right? And so we have to figure out who are funding these campaigns, these candidates, what are their agendas, right? Do these interest groups align with our interests, right? And then have conversations with them. Because most of the times candidates, they will reflect the people, but also their interest groups are in their pockets.
That's true.
That's a really good one, President Fields. I actually was going to bring that up. I'm glad you brought that up. Right? I've heard people say, I'm sure we've all heard it before. You want to get to the truth, follow the money, and I think that's what President Fields is speaking about. Because you're right. The people who fund these candidates, there's a reason why they put their money up. These candidates are out here advocating for the policies and whatever can benefit those who fund their campaign. I mean, it's
Yeah,
not rocket science, right?
yeah. I think that's something that we don't we neglect to pay attention to because we often forget that the United States of America is a corporation, right? And so it functions on capitalism, money, right? And these interest groups will push their agenda to these candidates, and these candidates are being funded by interest groups. So essentially, we have to align with those interest groups, right? Or we have to create our own outsider interest group that will fundraise and finance these candidates that come from our community, right?
Yep, that's a good point. That is a good point. And I want to lift up Brother Percy's, try to put this on the screen, his published work, Percy Glover, I'm sorry, Concrete Lies and Abstract Truths, Poetry and Flows. This is a published piece that he has out. I would strongly recommend that we support this brother and purchase this piece. And so just wanted to give a shout out on this piece of work here.
Yeah. Let me add one more point, and then I'm done. I think it's essential concern we must have is education. And on this ballot upcoming, we have the State Board of Education, and their primary role is to ensure that students, young people, K through 12, are on the path to success, right? Achieving their educational certification, and then on to bigger and better things. I don't have the statistics on me, but I have seen recently, especially in our county, Kent County, there has been a significant drop of enrolled students since COVID-19. There also has been a significant amount of teachers in public schools, for example. And so the kids, the youth, I'm sorry, and young adult are the future, the present and the future. And we have to make sure they're set up for success. And then how are these individuals going to ensure that these students are built on a pathway to success, right? And then also ensuring that these schools have the proper resources and finances to ensure that these students are well prepared, right? Some of the issues in our education system is, a lot of kids aren't able to eat, right? They aren't able to get the food lunch program, right? We found that high schools don't charter driving school. We saw that electives such as wood shop was taken out, and so a lot of students are in high school or just school period with no sense of direction of what to do after high school.
Well said. Education, we know that's extremely serious, especially coming out of this pandemic. Um, that's a very important one. So to your point, the school board seat, it's not always just about the commission, the state reps, but it's important we get the right people on the school board as well. I just put 2 links in the comments where you can get more information about campaign finances. So the first one was an article that MLive put out where they talked about kind of the DeVos family and where a lot of their dollars are going and specific candidates. And then the second link I put in there is MI campaign finance, where you can literally go search any candidate and see where their main contributors as far as financing is coming from. So I'm glad you brought that up, President Fields, because I think that's one of the most important ones as we really unpack the dynamics of this whole election conversation. We got to track the dollars, right?
Right. And I bring it up too because that should be a great indicator to the people in this live stream who's going to watching it now on the playback, that's how much at stake is on the ballot, right? It travels much further than just, going to the polls or, mailing in your absentee ballot, right? It travels a long way. And the reason why I brought up youth is that they aren't able to vote. So they're dependent on us to vote for people who will represent them and make sure they're on the right track.
Mm-hmm.
Well said, 100%. Well, I think we're approaching our time here, fellas. Let's go ahead and do some closing comments. One other thing I want to add really quick as far as transportation to the polls, I just saw that the Rapid, the local bus system is providing free rides to the polls, so take advantage there, as well as the national NAACP has a partnership with Lyft, and they're providing discounts to the polls as well. And if you got any questions about anything tomorrow, feel free to contact our office. We're going to have people on the phones prepared to answer those questions at 616-719-3478. I'll put that in the comments as well. That's 616-719-3478. So give us a call. You can also reach us via email, and that's at info@naacpgr.com. I'm going to just give my closing comments, then we'll do roundabout and wrap it up, fellas. But I think, what I'll say is stick with the theme of the campaign this year, and it's power your vote. Your vote holds power. Whether you believe it or not, we've had a lot of discussion today about the power of your vote. And tomorrow you have an opportunity to exercise that right. We cannot battle this issue of democracy from the outside. We got to attack it from the inside. And the way we do that is by exercising our rights. So I encourage you all to do so. And I'll go ahead and pass it to one of my brothers from here from closing comments.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share closing comments. If you didn't retain anything from what I said, retain this. When you go to the polls, right, these elections, you have to always think about quid pro quo, right? Am I getting the exchange for my vote, right? Something for something. Your vote has that much power where it can shift the direction of your community, right? Also, too, pay attention to interest groups, right? They shift the direction of the government, right? And a lot of these candidates are funded by interest groups. Their campaigns are funded by interest groups. Take a look and see if their agenda aligns with yours, and then get in contact with interest groups, right? And then hold your candidates accountable, right? The elected officials, I mean. After November 8th, like President Jackson said, the real work really begins, right? And we need to hold these officials accountable. You got my vote, okay? Now maintain your promises, right? Because there's a lot at stake. I mean, there are a plethora of offices on the ballot. Take a look at the ballot, right? And know what you are voting on ahead of time.
Well said, President Fields, and we'll go with President Jackson for his closing comments. And Mr. Glover, you have something as well.
Yeah, just brief. I was going to remind people, if you are running into any issues, you can, we strongly encourage you to call it's in the chat here or in the comments, 866-OUR-VOTE. It is a line to report any issues that you may run into if you're at the polls. And I think everything else has been said. I want to thank Brother Percy, for coming on and joining us tonight. I know you're out there on the ground. I'm actually supposed to be heading out to Lansing to grab some things, but we'll see if we'll be able to do that tonight. But thanks everyone for tapping in.
For sure. And thank you, Miss Fields, as well. She said a lot of great, important points and information. Thank you. And we thank you as well. With that said, it's 7 o'clock. Let's make sure we power our vote tomorrow, and let's black the polls, black the vote, and turn out tomorrow for the election November 8th. And Miss Jackson said before we go, don't forget to vote on the proposals and the judges. Don't forget to vote on the proposals and the judges. And we will see you all soon. Get out to vote.